good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that brings you tonight's program with Ellen Cookman, attorney and founder of Cookman Law. I'll be telling you a little bit more about Ellen in a minute, but we're so happy that you could join us tonight for her presentation, Basics of Special Needs Planning, Estate Planning, Trusts, and Able Accounts. Please join me, everyone, in a really warm welcome for Ellen Cookman. Take it away.
Wow. Thank you so much, Charlene. It's such a pleasure to be speaking here. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the slides. You know, so many of the organizations that are co-sponsoring this, I just love each organization. So this is really a thrill. Yeah, so we are talking about the basics of special needs planning. Here's a little bit about me, which Charlene had already mentioned. I think that the bottom bullet point is, to me, one of the most important, is that, you know, my son Caleb is 12 and he's turning 12. He has high functioning autism. And so I was actually in this field in estate planning and special needs planning before his diagnosis. So I went from being an advocate in the community to being a parent. And it really is a different perspective. And so as parents, that's really the perspective we're looking at tonight. We have some goals for our children. You know, I think the most important one is we want our child to have the best quality of life possible, bar none, right? We also want to protect our child from financial predators, and we want them to be as independent as possible as well, right? We do, if they're eligible for public benefits, we want to maximize those. You know, why not? The government's providing something, we want our kids to be able to get it. A lot of the planning that we're doing is we're setting up surrogate parents, surrogate financial parents. What happens when you're gone? I mean, that's what most of my clients stay up at night worried about. Who's going to advocate for my child? Nobody will do it the way that you can, but, you know, we're trying to set up some scaffolding around your child, so when you're gone, there's a great team to be able to help care for your child. And then finally, I may be a lawyer, but I hate going to court. So I want to avoid the court system whenever I can. So those are really the goals that we're talking about. So what I want to do now is kind of a new thing. And I want to see if I can. Let's see. It doesn't come up for sharing, because I have, what I might need to do. No, I have a survey that I wanted to share, but it doesn't allow me to do that. Well, so I'm just going to keep going. How about that?
Ellen, is it your poll or a survey?
Oh, it's a poll. Sorry, it's a poll.
Wait, we can do your poll.
Oh, can you do that? Okay.
Yes,
I'm not the technology guru. I will readily admit that. Okay, so poll number 1.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Riley, oh, here it is, polls. All right, would you like me, do you all see that? No?
I don't know.
No. I see it, but I don't know how to get you all to see it. No?
More. Wait. Oh, I think I found it.
There we go. People are answering.
Okay. Okay, so what do you have set up for your child? Special needs trust, first party special needs trust. So the first one is really third party special needs trust. First party special needs trust, able account, you don't really know, and then maybe not applicable. Okay, so I see there's kind of a spread of different understanding, different things set up. Okay, so let's do the second. Oh, we have a few more people responding. Ooh, let's give it a few more minutes. That's great. One number I love to see is that about a quarter of you have able accounts set up. To me, that one's a no-brainer. I love able accounts. So I will be talking about those. As you can see on our roadmap, as people are replying, you know, we're going to be talking about public benefits, just kind of an overview. We'll talk about both of these types of special needs trust, third party and first party. We'll talk about other things you might need, and then able accounts. Okay, so great responses. You guys can see the that. Oh, and then I have a special needs loved one. Okay, so most folks here seem to be have minors under age 18. Some have 19 to 26, and then it goes on. So that does give me a great picture of kind of where to focus my energies, but I'm happy to take questions about everyone. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now, but thank you so much for your participation. Oh, now I have to share the results so you guys can see them. I was just talking about them. I thought you could see them. I'm telling you, this is a new thing. Okay, so very interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and move on. All right, so we saw the roadmap. So now let's talk about public benefits. All right, so here's the issue. Once your child turns 18, and as many of you said, your children are under 18, so this will be very helpful for you because you'll kind of see what comes in the future. Once your child turns 18, all of a sudden they're an adult, which is really funny if you've met 18-year-olds nowadays. Some of them are not quite adulting yet, whether they're neurotypical or they have special needs. But what happens is when you turn 18, all of a sudden your parents' money is not attributable to you, and so you become poor. And that means that you can qualify for certain needs-based public benefits. I like to think of these benefits as what you get when you're not able to work and support yourself. If you can work, you get a salary, right? You get an income stream, and you get health insurance. Now, it's my hope that someday we will join all the other developed nations in the world that have depopulated their health insurance from work, but that's not us right now in the US. So they are connected. So, so we want to make sure that people have health insurance as well. So here is my slide about public benefits. Okay, so on the top, you'll see supplemental security income, or SSI, and that's the top left. All right, so that's an income stream that you can qualify for once you turn 18, and the most you can get from that is about $1,200 a month. This is intended to supplement any income you're already receiving. So if you have a child who's working and getting $400 a month from their earned income, then they can get a supplement of a bit more, of 800, and it's a different calculation, but let's say about 800 more in SSI. Now, one really cool thing about SSI is if you get even $1 of SSI, you automatically qualify for Medi-Cal, which is California's version of the federal Medicaid system. So it's a health insurance plan. It's it's complete, though it's comprehensive, though not perfect. All right. Now there's a huge change in the law that took place this year. In order to qualify for Medi-Cal, they don't look at your resources. All right. Compare that to SSI, where you have to have under $2,000 of countable assets to qualify for SSI. Okay. It used to be $2,000 for Medi-Cal, by the way, and every other state in our country, they still have a resource limit of $2,000. We are jet setters, you guys. In California, you should be so proud of our country that we've done away with that resource limit. We still have an income limit, though. You can earn or have passive income of up to $1,700 about, and still get Medi-Cal. Anything over that, and you start paying what we call a share of cost, which is pretty punishing. It's like a premium that's very expensive. So those are the two programs where SSI, they look at your resources and your income, and you can qualify. So they call that needs-based because you need it because you don't have a lot of money. All right. SSI, and then Medi-Cal is also needs-based because you need to have less than a certain income amount to qualify. Then when you look at the bottom two, we have SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. And you see a slash, and then it says CDB. That stands for Child Disability Benefits. So let me explain that. All right. So Social Security Disability is when you've worked for a while and then you become disabled. Then you can qualify for an income stream based on the amount that you've worked, the number of quarters that you've paid into the system. Okay. CDB benefits are different. That is, if you're a parent and you've worked for a while and then you retire and you have a disabled child who became disabled before age 22, you can get your full Social Security amount and your child can get half of what you're receiving at the same time that you're getting your full amount. Now, keep in mind, Social Security does not advertise this. You have to ask for it, all right? But it's a really wonderful benefit. And that is not needs-based. You're entitled to it because the parents have paid into the system, all right? And then here's a really nice thing about receiving SSDI or CDB benefits. After 2 years, you qualify for Medicare. So you don't have to be age 65 and up to get Medicare if you're on one of those benefits. So you may not care about the income stream, but most people really do care about health insurance. So I want you to, though, for now, really focus on the top two, SSI and Medi-Cal. Both of those, if you receive an inheritance and you're getting SSI or Medi-Cal, that can bump you off that those benefits. The inheritance, receiving more than the resource limit or the income limit, you lose your SSI and Medi-Cal. What do? We set up what's called a special needs trust. Okay. So a special needs trust is a trust that becomes irrevocable, and it holds assets for the benefit of somebody who's disabled. And that person who's disabled cannot manage the money themselves. Somebody else is acting as trustee. And the disabled person can't change the trust or revoke it. And because of that, it doesn't count as the disabled person's money. Okay. And so that disabled person can continue to receive SSI and Medi-Cal because it doesn't count towards that $2,000 resource limit or that income limit. So it's wonderful. I like to think of it like a safety net. You know, your child gets whatever public benefits they're receiving, and the money in the special needs trust doesn't interfere with it. It's awesome. Well, what can it pay for? There's this fallacy out there that, oh, special needs trusts are so restrictive. Oh, you can only use it to pay for this little thing. No, there was a recent court case just last year, and I love this quote. So I took it out of the court case. That's actually a quote from a CEB book that was written, but I love it. It says, it encompasses the very broad range of everything else a human being needs in order to live, thrive, and realize his or her potential in life. Isn't that beautiful? So whatever that child needs to live and thrive and realize their full potential, this could be a fun trip to Disneyland, right? This could be, a modified van. This could be a great birthday party, right? So it is quite broad in its definition. So there's two main types of special needs trusts. There's what we call a third-party special needs trust and a first-party special needs trust. So the distinction really is the source of the money. So let me explain that. Okay. So if you are a parent and you're leaving money to your child in a trust, that would be a third-party special needs trust because you, in relation to the child, you are a third party. So it's somebody else's money going into a trust for the disabled child's benefit. And by the way, when I say child, you could have a child who's 60 years old. I'm just saying, it's your child, right? They'll always be your child. Now, compare that. So really anybody can set up a third-party special needs trust for a disabled person. An auntie can, a friend, a grandma, kind of anybody, all right? Compare that to a first-party special needs trust. That type of trust very specifically is created to hold the disabled person's own money. All right. So maybe the disabled person was working for a while, they have money, and then they became disabled and they need to protect it. They could put it into their own first party special needs trust. Or maybe there is a big litigation settlement and they need to protect their public benefits. Okay. So a first party special needs trust can only be set up by the disabled person themselves, if they have capacity, or by a parent, or a grandparent, or the court. So it's more limited. Also, a first-party special needs trust can only be set up up until the person turns 65. It has to be funded before the beneficiary, the disabled person, turns 65. Okay. And the biggest drawback of a first-party special needs trust is that when the disabled child dies, Medi-Cal wants their money back. And they can bring a reimbursement claim against any money left in the first-party special needs trust to get that money back before the money goes where the trust says. Okay, so I have a chart where I kind of talk about the different types of special needs trusts. So you'll see, you know, the first line, right, it's a third-party special needs trust. That money can be anyone except for the beneficiary and the beneficiary's spouse, by the way. Anyone can put the money into the special needs trust, and anyone can set it up. And on death, that money goes wherever the trust says. Whoever created the trust gets to decide where the money goes. Super helpful, okay? There's no Medi-Cal payback for a third-party special needs trust. But look at the first-party special needs trust. Oh boy, right? It needs to be funded before age 65. There's only certain people who can set it up. And Medi-Cal gets their money upon the beneficiary's death. So it's more restrictive, all right? Then I also put down that there's a pooled trust. That's kind of like a first-party special needs trust that's run by a nonprofit organization, all right? And you can fund that at age 65 or older. So a lot of times I think of it like a first-party special needs trust for somebody who's older, or maybe they just don't have a lot of money that's going into the trust and they can't find a trustee. A nonprofit organization will take a special needs trust of basically any size. Okay. Upon the beneficiary's death, a lot of times the remaining money, instead of the Medi-Cal payback going to Medi-Cal, the Medi-Cal payback can go to the nonprofit to kind of pay the nonprofit for the services that they've provided, and then it goes to the remainder beneficiaries. Okay, so I'd like to pause here to take a sip of water and also see, you know, if there are any questions so far about these types of special needs trusts.
Yes, Ellen, are you going to talk about able trust accounts? Should I ask those questions later when you get there?
Yes, we'll talk about those. That's on our roadmap at the end.
Okay,
But we
then,
will get there, I promise.
okay, then we have lots of questions, but how about this one? What qualifies as assets or income resources to qualify for these programs? Do 429 or able accounts count as assets?
Oh, okay. So an able account, and we'll talk about that, an able account does not count towards your countable assets, happily. That's why people set up able accounts. And so, but again, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay, then let's don't do that. We just,
Okay.
people are asking really good questions, but you should just keep going.
Okay, I'll keep going then. Great. Let's keep going, but we can circle back for sure. Okay, so when we're thinking about a special needs trust, I think the biggest choice to make is who's going to be successor trustee of the special needs trust. You can be trustee initially, the parent, but then when you're gone, who's going to take over managing the money for your child? Who's going to advocate on their behalf? Who's going to figure out their housing, all of those things? So when you think about that, a lot of times you think about naming a family member or a friend. Those are kind of the normal choices. But this is a really big role, all right? You're basically managing a trust for somebody, perhaps 60, 70 years, okay? And you have to understand all the public benefits rules. You know, I gave a brief overview in that one slide, but there's a whole lot of rules to understand, okay? So a lot of times people will name a professional instead. And let me just mention, sometimes people think, well, I'll just name the neurotypical sibling. I usually discourage that because that sibling might want to spread their wings and move to New York City or another country and raise their own family, and they don't want to be the surrogate parents to their sibling. Okay, so you can look into, there's different types of professionals out there. There's individuals called private professional fiduciaries, and they basically for a profession, they manage trusts. That's what they do. And there's some really good ones out there. One problem, though, is that they are human, and so that means that they might retire or die, right? And so you need to have some sort of succession plan to make sure that somebody's named for the lifetime of your child. There's also banks and trust companies that act as trustee, and they can do a very good job. Sometimes people don't like them because they tend to charge a percentage, which can get more expensive. And also they usually require at least $1 million in the special needs trust, which is not available to everybody. Okay. Then we mentioned the pooled trust. You can also combine them. Now, if you're naming a professional, one challenge you might have is who's going to oversee the professional, right? How do we know that that private fiduciary isn't just going to take all the money and run? So we like building in oversight because your child may not be able to provide that oversight themselves. What, the good thing about a trust is that it doesn't go through court. Yay, because I don't like going to court and it's expensive and time consuming in public. But the nice thing that a court provides is oversight. So you're missing out on that. So what do? Well, a lot of times I like naming somebody called a trust protector. And this is someone who can oversee what the trustee is doing. They get yearly accountings. They have the power to remove and replace the trustee. They have access to all the books. So they're basically making sure that the professional is doing their job. And if they're not, they can remove them and find somebody else. And that trust protector role can be a really powerful role for the neurotypical sibling who's living their own life, but they check in once a year and see, okay, how's everything going for my sibling who I love, but I just don't have the time to be the surrogate financial parent. You can also name co-trustees. I think I mentioned that in the last slide. Sometimes a bank will act as co-trustee with an individual. And then sometimes people will name an advisory committee if they have several professionals that they want to be involved in advising the trustee on how to utilize the funds, or what new treatments have become available. You can name an advisory committee. It's kind of fallen out of favor a bit because it tends to get more expensive and cumbersome, but it definitely it's available. Okay, now I think this is a super important component. You should write what we call a memo of intent. And basically this is a dear successor trustee letter. Okay, what makes your child happy? What ticks them off? What housing plans do you have for them? What medications have they tried before? What has not worked? Everything that you know about your child that you've learned over the years, you can kind of download it to them in this memo. And this is separate from the trust. It's not included in the trust. So you can update it every several years. And let me tell you, trustees, they love these memos of intent because it gets them up to speed on this child who may not be able to communicate all of these things themselves. Or maybe they have mental health challenges and they'd rather you not know, right? So it's really a great way to get everybody up to speed. And I always recommend that. And by the way, I don't know if we've mentioned, but I have a YouTube channel. Don't turn there now, but I have about 5,000 subscribers, about 100 videos. And I do have a video on the memo of intent. So if you're wondering more about, what should I put in it? Most of the topics that I'm talking about here are covered in a video, just to let you know. Okay, so I do have some people come in and they've set up a special needs trust and it's embedded within their revocable trust. All right. And they think, okay, is this good enough? Should I do it this way? Well, there's pros and cons, and I want to kind of talk about that. I typically recommend doing what we call a standalone special needs trust, which means that you have your special needs trust as a separate entity that's like an empty basket that's waiting to be funded. We call it a seed trust, SEED. Okay. And why would you want to do that? Well, there's two main reasons. One reason is if you have other family members who want to leave money to your child, maybe they want to leave $100,000 or something, to your child, your disabled child, then you need to have a trust that's functioning when they die. And if it's embedded within your revocable trust and you're still alive, that special needs trust is not up and running yet. So it doesn't function. So a special needs trust can receive money from many different sources. But I think the second reason is even more important. Okay, so this is what happens. When you die, the special needs trust is funded. And then if your child is receiving public benefits, Social Security Administration needs to get a copy of the trust so they can confirm that it really is a valid special needs trust. So you're required to send them a copy and then they look it over. Now, these are not, trained trust specialists, all right? And if you send them a copy of the revocable trust and say, well, see Article 6, which has the special needs trust, they get confused. They don't know who's the trustee, who's the alternate beneficiary. Can the beneficiary change this? What? And I actually heard that sometimes they make you cut and paste the testamentary special needs trust language to help them review it. So for these reasons, I just about always recommend doing a standalone special needs trust. There are some people, a lot of people out there, unfortunately, who are estate planning attorneys, and they say, oh, you have a child with special needs. Here, I have a little button that I can push and it'll populate a testamentary special needs trust. I'm sure that it works. They have no idea how it works or if it actually works for your child. So I think that should be malpractice, but it does happen. So you really, whether it's me or somebody else, if you have a child with special needs, you really do want to go to somebody who specializes in this field, who understands how the public benefits are impacted, and who does a standalone special needs trust for you. That's my opinion. Okay, so what goes into a special needs trust? In the estate planning world, we call putting stuff into a trust, we call that funding a trust. Okay, so what goes into a special needs trust? Well, just about anything, typically it's like cash and investments. The more liquidity you have, the better, because that's the stuff that can actually be used to buy stuff for the child to support them. Okay, but you can also put a house into a special needs trust. That's totally fine. And then the trustee of the special needs trust will manage the house. Now, if your estate is more modest, sometimes people like funding a special needs trust with life insurance, okay? Because that's the perfect time to fund it is when you're gone. So you can get a life insurance policy and get a special needs trust. And then in the policy, in the beneficiary designation, you say, upon my death, all of the life insurance proceeds go into this special needs trust. So there's different ways that you can fund it. I do want to talk for a second about retirement accounts, because that is one way to fund it, and it gets a little bit tricky and complicated. All right, so I'm going to walk you through this. So here's the issue. When you fund a pre-tax retirement account, like a 401k or an IRA or a 403b, the nice thing about that is then you don't have to report that as earned income. It lowers your tax liability. But the problem is when somebody inherits it, they have to pay the taxes themselves. Okay. It used to be that you could inherit a pre-tax retirement account as a child and stretch it out over your lifetime and only make required minimum distributions based on your life expectancy. Unfortunately, that's not available to most people now. Okay. The Secure Act of 2020 changed that. It provided more benefits to the baby boomers and those of us who are older, who are retiring, but it's paid for by the next generation, unfortunately. Okay. So what happened is now if you're a child of a participant who died, you inherit the retirement account, but you can only stretch it out over 10 years. And you have to pay all of the taxes within 10 years. It's really a bummer. All right. However, there are several exceptions, and those exceptions are called eligible designated beneficiaries. So if you are an EDB, you still get these stretch out benefits. You can still stretch them out over your lifetime and only pay income taxes based on what you're required to withdraw. So it's really a way to delay paying income taxes. So here are the categories under the Secure Act. Okay. You can stretch them out over your lifetime if you're a minor child. If you're a spouse, you still can. All right. So you can inherit a retirement account from a spouse, stretch it out over your lifetime. A disabled person or their special needs trust is an eligible designated beneficiary. So the silver lining to having a child with special needs is you can leave them a retirement account or their special needs trust. It can stretch it out over their lifetime and not based on 10 years. So you see, everybody else is a designated beneficiary. They don't get that E before the DB, all right? And then a non-designated beneficiary is actually the 5-year rule. So if something goes into a trust and you can't determine its life expectancy because it's not a person, then it gets 5 years to withdraw all the money. So here's the punchline of all this. What we're seeing more people doing is actually leaving their retirement accounts to their disabled child special needs trust, as opposed to the neurotypical child. Because the disabled child special needs trust, they have more time to pay all the taxes and they can defer payment of taxes. All right. But that is still something to talk about with your financial advisor. You have to run the numbers. There's certain things to consider there. Okay, so there's a couple situations where you may have a child who needs some extra help, but you may not need a special needs trust. So I just want to cover those quickly. So an OBRA 93, what is this? Okay, this, remember when I was talking about Medi-Cal not having a resource limit anymore? And they only look at your income? Well, instead of setting up a first-party special needs trust for somebody who has received money themselves, they can set up something called an OBRA 93 trust. It's more similar to setting up a revocable living trust. All right. So if there's no resource requirements like SSI, also Section 8 housing is imposing a resource limit now, I think it's starting next year, of $100,000. Real bummer. What happens is any income that's generated in the trust does not count as income for Medi-Cal purposes. And as long as that income is not distributed in the form of cash to the beneficiary, it doesn't count as income for Medi-Cal purposes. So we usually suggest somebody else be named as trustee. It's not required like a special needs trust, but we suggest that because that somebody else can make sure that cash never gets distributed to that person. Instead, maybe they have a Visa card that they can use. Maybe, the trustee still buys stuff for them. So there's some nuances to this and we're still figuring it out, okay? Because this is 2024. This is the first year we're using these trusts, all right? But one of the great things about setting up an OBRA 93 trust is there's no Medi-Cal payback. Yay, all right? So this is an option. Let's say your child is receiving Medi-Cal, SSDI, and Medicare, but they're not receiving SSI or Section 8 housing, and they come into their own money, they can get an OBRA 93 trust instead of having to set up a first-party special needs trust. Very interesting to me. Now, what about if you have a child who's just receiving SSDI or Medicare and they don't look at passive income at all? Or what if you have a child who's never going to get public benefits at all? Maybe they have mental health challenges, but they don't qualify for public benefits. Or maybe you have a neurotypical child and you just want to make sure that, the evil ex-spouse doesn't take half of their money. For all of these situations, a dynasty trust can be very helpful. Okay, so this is basically a lifetime trust that is used for anything that the beneficiary needs, and the beneficiary can become trustee. All right, so if you have a neurotypical child and you say, hey, their inheritance goes into a dynasty trust, my child becomes trustee at age 30, but if they get married and then divorced, all of this money stays in their own trust. It's their own separate property. It never gets divided with the ex-spouse. And it also has a very high level of creditor protection. It also has estate tax protection. So anything that goes into the dynasty trust that's free of estate taxes can grow and grow and grow. And when it goes to your child's children, none of it is subject to estate taxes. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so in my next slide, I'll be going into able accounts. So I do want to stop and take any non-able account related questions, anything about the first party, third party special needs trust, this really weird OBRA 93 trust thing, dynasty trust, anything like that.
So Ellen, we're getting lots of questions about the different kinds of trusts, especially the difference, as you say, between, first and third and what kinds of special need trusts there are. Can you do any clarifying for us? This all seems very complicated. Like maybe you could speak to whether or not there are low cost or free resources. It seems like you would need an attorney to walk you through all the options.
That's true. That's true. Well, I do have a video that's called What Kinds of Trusts Are Out There, something like that. Okay. I have another video on, unfortunately, there's not a lot of information out there, and that's why I started the YouTube channel, right? There's really two main ones. And the question is, whose money is going into the trust?
Okay.
Okay. If it's the beneficiary's own money that needs to be protected and go into the trust, it's a first party special needs trust. If it's anybody else's money that needs to go into the trust, it's a third party special needs trust. That's it.
Okay.
So it's the source of the funds. Where is the money coming from?
Okay. One more quick question then, Ellen.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the audience probably have this question. Can a grandparent leave a retirement account and the grandchild gets the EDB tax schedule, or only a parent can do that? Can a grandparent do it?
A grandparent can too. Yeah, I believe so. As long as they're looking at who's the recipient.
Right.
And as long as the recipient is disabled, then they should be able to stretch out the benefits. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so let's keep going and then we can always answer more questions later. Able accounts, what you guys all came here to learn about. What is an able account? Okay, I love able accounts. Let me tell you kind of the story of how it got started, I think, or that I've heard. Maybe it's an old wives' tale, but this is what I've heard. All right, there was a group of parents in Virginia who were parents of adults with Down syndrome, and their children wanted to work and save up their money. But remember that SSI resource limit of $2,000? They were kicked off of SSI if they saved their money over $2,000 even 1 month. And the parents were thinking, this isn't right. And the kids were thinking that too. I mean, this is America. We want to be able to save up our money and buy big things. And so they spoke with their representative in Virginia, who got great bipartisan support for this thing called an ABLE account. Okay, and it stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. It's based on a 529 plan, an education savings plan. So the idea is post-tax money goes into the ABLE account, and the account can grow and grow and grow. And as long as you withdraw money for qualified disability expenses, which by the way is a very broad definition, you don't have to pay any of the capital gains tax of when the money is grown. All right. The account does not interfere with public benefits. I think we mentioned that before. So if you're getting SSI or Medi-Cal, none of the money in the ABLE account counts as a resource, which is super cool. Now, another thing you should know is that the ABLE account was created to be like a first party special needs trust, in that it was supposed to have a Medicaid or Medi-Cal payback provision, that when the beneficiary dies, Medi-Cal gets to go after the money. But they allow states to waive that Medi-Cal payback, and California is one of the 5 states that has waived a Medi-Cal payback. So when the beneficiary dies, Medi-Cal does not get any of that money. Again, great place to live, California. Yay. Yes. One of the main limitations is that you can't put a ton of money into the ABLE account all at once. You can only put in up to $18,000 a year. And that doesn't mean mom can put in $18,000 and grandma can put in $18,000. No, Once 18,000 goes in, it's capped off, and you can't put in any more money until the next year. Okay. Although there are some exceptions if the beneficiary, if the child is working. So we'll get to that. Okay, so how do you become eligible? All right, well, you have to have become disabled before age 26. But in 2 years, that number is going up to age 46. I am so happy about this because age 26, it was like kind of this arbitrary number to get it passed through Congress. But that really leaves a lot of people out, especially those with mental health challenges, or if they get into a car accident later in life. So soon it will be age 46. You have to have become disabled before age 46. And you have to either be receiving SSI or SSDI or have a written letter from a doctor. And I actually have an example of that. It's basically a self-serving doctor's letter. So it's really, really easy. Just get a doctor to sign a letter. All right. So let me show you that. Okay, so Able Now has put together, you just give this to the doctor. They put in the beneficiary's name and they say, yep, this person became disabled before age 26. Check. That's it. And nobody's auditing this, by the way. You don't have to submit this letter to the Able program. All right. Okay, so here's some rules. You have to use it for qualified disability expenses. And I think I have a list of that somewhere, but it's broad. You can open, if you're disabled yourself, you can open it for yourself, or an authorized individual can open it for you. And then the authorized legal representative, the person who opened it or the person who's managing it, they can manage it for you, or you can manage it yourself. It's kind of like if you're familiar with a representative payee for Social Security payments. It's a similar concept. The child can manage their own money if they have capacity, or another adult can manage it for them. Now, one really nice thing about an Able account is anybody can contribute to it. A child can contribute to their own Able account. A friend or a family member can contribute to an Able account. Anyone can, but you only get one Able account. You can't like set one up in Tennessee and one in Ohio and one in California. You just get one. Now here's a limitation. If you're contributing over several years and it exceeds $100,000 and you're receiving SSI, your SSI check is suspended, but you can continue to receive Medi-Cal. But for that reason, most people are keeping their Able accounts under $100,000. Right? Okay, other details. So since it's modeled after a 529 plan, you can actually roll money from a 529 plan into an Able account, $18,000 worth, or vice versa. Okay, that rule is going to end in 2026. I hope they extend it. All right. Now here's another really neat thing. If you're working and you're the beneficiary, you can add an extra, it's about $15,000 of your own earned income into the Able account, in addition to the $18,000 that's coming from whoever. All right. So in that case, you can have about $33,000 going in per year, but you can only add to it if as you're working, you're not participating in your employer's retirement plan, because I think they kind of count this as your retirement. All right. Now, one rule that was passed last year is that starting January 2023, so starting last year, if you set up an Able account in a different state, Medi-Cal gets to bring a reimbursement claim. All right. So you always want it. This is their carrot and their stick, right? To incentivize you to set up an Able account with California, which we call Cal Able. We always have a cutesy name. It's Cal Able. Okay. If you set one up before January 2023, you're grandfathered in. So you don't have to switch from, it took us in California, I think it was 2018 or 2019 before we established an Able account. So a lot of people before that set up Able accounts in other states. So you can keep it there. But if you're from here on out, or from January of last year on out, you must set it up in California in order to avoid the Medi-Cal reimbursement claim. Okay, so maybe now you're thinking, what's a qualified disability expense? What can this be used to pay for? Big, long list of stuff. And by the way, it can pay for a trip to Disneyland. All right, that's kind of my test of like, how much fun can you have with this money? A lot of fun. All right, so it's very, very broad. Okay, so here's a chart, and I do have a way to distribute these slides. So if you want, you can go back over the slides. I don't want to really fixate on these, but I do compare, when would you use these different things? I want to point out an ABLE account is not meant to supplant the special needs trust. A special needs trust is still really important for receiving an inheritance, for example, because the ABLE account can only receive $18,000 per year. All right. But an ABLE account is really good, for example, for receiving gifts from other family members. Okay. And here's how you set up the ABLE account. Here's some places you can go to their website. And it's just one place. So don't go into your local Wells Fargo and say, I want a Cal ABLE account. They'll have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, and this is some information you need to provide, and you can get a prepaid Visa card, and that's how you access it. I don't think I have time to go over the next 2 slides, but I do have videos that I can refer to you to looking at. Okay, so it's a little bit more about the ABLE account. Okay, so what now? I've dumped a ton of information on you. What should you actually do? Well, first, I encourage you to take a look at your estate planning documents and see, do they match what you want? Do you even understand them? You can reach out to our office or, another estate planning office. People often switch estate planning attorneys, by the way. And also share this information with somebody else that you think could benefit from it. And then here's a little bit about our firm. So we're located in Palo Alto. We're a virtual firm. But we can meet in person as well in Palo Alto. And I did mention my YouTube channel, so please like and subscribe. And I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn if you like the social media aspect. Okay, last thing. If you scan this QR code, we will send you the slides and you can be added to our monthly mailing list. So feel free to do that if you'd like. So now I'm going to pause and take some questions.
Well, thank you, Ellen. That was a lot, and we have an incredible number of questions. So everybody bear with us. We're going to see what we can do in the time that we have left. All right, Ellen, thanks again for all of this and for sharing your slides and your video library. This is unfamiliar territory for me, so I can see it's quite complicated, and our questions show that everybody has very particular questions, but let's ask a few general ones, okay? First of all, does your child have to have a specific diagnosis to qualify for a special needs trust?
Ooh, such a good question. So for a third-party special needs trust that's receiving money from other people, your child doesn't even have to be disabled.
Oh,
Yeah. So they may not be receiving SSI or SSDI. You can still set up a special needs trust for them. A first-party special needs trust is different. They really do have to be disabled and be receiving SSI or SSDI to qualify for that special needs trust. Now, when it comes to public benefits, let me just mention, they're not looking at what type of disability does your child have. Do they have cerebral palsy? Do they have MS? Do they have this or that? They look to see, does your child's disability interfere with their ability to work and support themselves? That's what they care about when they're looking at qualifying for public benefits.
okay. Ellen, parent asks here, I've been told to hold off on setting up an SNT and ABLE account until after my child is 18 and qualified for SSI. Is that correct or incorrect?
Well, I mean, the time you really need to set up the special needs trust is before you die.
Okay.
So hopefully you'll live past your child's 18th birthday, but there's no guarantee. So I say the time to set it up is now. We can always build in a lot of flexibility. I don't really see a reason to wait until the child turns 18 because the special needs trust, if you die and the child is 5, they need the special needs trust. So, or if you become incapacitated and you don't have the capacity to set up a special needs trust for your child. So I say, now's the time to do it.
Okay. Okay. Ellen, what are some common mistakes that families make in special needs planning, and how can these be avoided?
Ooh, what a great question. So one of them, as I mentioned, is, working with somebody who doesn't know anything about special needs planning,
Yeah.
but they can kind of do it as an addition. And say, if you have a child who has special needs, that is such a core part of your planning, please go to an expert and really learn about it. Okay. What are some other mistakes? I think who you name as trustee is essential. And just, I think people can kind of get um, panicky or paralyzed or maybe lazy. And they just go, well, this family, we'll just name this family member. And you don't talk to them to see how they feel about it. You don't consider their resources or how much bandwidth they have. I mean, I really think you really need to think through, how is this actually going to work? Who's going to be doing the day-to-day stuff? And then also making sure that you have a great team. I often say, you need a professional trifecta of, a state planning attorney, a financial advisor who understands special needs planning, and an accountant. It's the three
Right.
of us that really help to make sure that all the bases are covered.
Okay. And this is a really good question, Ellen, and related to that. Parent asks, I'd like my child to be involved and do some financial planning in whatever way makes sense. What advice do you have regarding involving my child in planning?
Yes, I think that's such a good idea. I think children should always, be as comfortable as you feel sharing information. You can share, if you're choosing a professional trustee for your child, you should introduce them and see if they get along, right? When your child turns 18, you should have them sign a durable power of attorney and healthcare directive. We didn't cover that, but everybody should have one to make sure that someone else can act on their behalf. But also just teaching them about budgeting. I grew up and didn't really know how to do a budget. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but that wasn't a big thing in my family to teach people how to do that. And I kind of wish that so I had to learn it later in life. So I think the more you involve your kids, the more you share with them. I think family meetings are fabulous. Sharing, having everybody have a meeting with the attorney, and then the attorney can kind of explain, okay, this is how it flows. This is who's going to be managing things. What do you guys think about it? And the more that your kids understand and know that this is your wish, even if they may not agree with it, if they know that this is what you wanted, they're less likely to object or to get into fights because they want to honor your wishes.
Okay. Here's a parent, great comment. This is all so helpful and interesting, but I wish we had more time to go through everything. Do you give workshops on this topic, Ellen?
I do. So, if you're on social media, I do post sometimes when I'm, giving talks. Um, Again, YouTube channel, you'll find just about every topic on here. If you go to Ellen Cookman Special Needs Planner and, you kind of type in what subject you're looking for, or go to my website under resources, I list a lot of the videos, and I also have a blog site. So yeah, there's a lot of ways if you want to hear more from me.
Well, and we do, because this,
Okay.
again, for those of us who aren't as familiar with it, this is so much information, obviously all very important. Ellen, what should a family look for in a financial planner who's adept with this kind of planning? You've already mentioned that you do need an attorney and a financial planner and an accountant. So where do people start?
Yes. Okay. So for financial planners, there's a designation called a Chartered Special Needs Consultant.
Okay.
C, C, oh boy, I'm not going to even try to do the letters. But basically, that's a designation that people can earn by taking different classes and learning about how to do planning for families with special needs. And I think the number one thing that everybody needs is doing financial projections. Figuring out how much do you need to put in that special needs trust for your child? How much do they need to live on for the rest of their life if they're not able to bring in their own income? It's kind of like when you retire and you're planning out, how much do I need saved up for the next 30 years, right? But here you're saying, how much do I need saved up for the next 70 years for my child? Okay. And not every financial advisor can do this. You know, it's a certain craft to understand your child's needs. You know, how much are they out in society? You know, what types of medical interventions do they need? So it's a difficult calculation, but it's so important, I think, especially for our peace of mind and being able to sleep, knowing that when we're gone, there will be enough money in that trust.
Ellen, do you have some recommendations for people who have low or limited incomes who want to do something for their child?
Well, so I think I mentioned the life insurance. I think that can be a really good way to set this up. I think also an ABLE account
Okay.
is, I think it's $50 to set it up, or maybe less. And it's a great savings tool, especially if you have other family members who want to contribute, you know, or you can slowly contribute to it yourself, and it'll be available for your child even when you're gone. So there's definitely, yeah, there's different ways to do that. Mhm.
Okay. Well, Ellen, this has been incredible. We are so grateful for your time and expertise and all the information. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful questions. I wish we had hours to answer all of them, but you can see people are really grateful. So we're going to get your slides. This event has been recorded. Everyone will be available soon, both on our video library and on the Neuroscience Education Series website. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Callie and Riley, for being such great partners. And take care, everybody. We hope to see you again soon. There is a survey link that you will see in the chat. And when I end the session, hopefully everybody take 1 minute to fill in our survey as well. But Ellen, thank you. Thank you. This was a great session.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. Good night.